Christian or Not is a production of Revive Studios.
America has had only one U.S. president that had a PhD, which I was surprised by. I wasn't thinking that all of them had PhDs, but I would have assumed it would be more than just one. This one president is also one of the most, on paper, Christian presidents you would have ever seen. In fact, in his presidency, his opponents slandered him because there was a story that when he got some bad news, he ran back to his room, got down on his knees, and prayed, "God help me, what do I do?" But the people of America were not swayed by that, and were not bothered by that. To them, that was a sign of a faithful Christian president. Before he was president, he spoke at chapels. Before he was president, he spoke at YMCAs. In fact, he was considered one of the best preachers many people heard in an age where Charles Spurgeon and some of the best preachers that ever lived were preaching. People loved this president's sermons, or at least some of them did. This guy, on paper, looks like he should be the most Christian president that the United States ever had. And it should be, on paper, this should be a slam dunk. Christian or not, shouldn't even be including his name. And yet, Woodrow Wilson is one of the most controversial presidencies. You've either never heard his name before, or you have heard his name and you're already spitting mad because you know the legacy that he left behind. But the question for us today is not necessarily everything about his legacy, though we will talk much about what he did as president of the United States. The question for us on this show is, was he a Christian or not? My name is Troy.
And my name is Mark, and this is Christian or Not, where we talk about famous people from history, talk about just some of their biography, what did they do, why are they famous, why do we know them, why are we talking about them on a podcast, and then we want to answer the question, were they Christian or not? Like usually these people were known for being Christians or not, like very obviously not, but we usually pick the ones that you would think are, and maybe they really are, or maybe they're not. Well, Mark and Troy, are you trying to judge people? I mean, in a way, yes, but of course, we can't see the hearts of Maya. Troy's laughing now because we try to do this intro every time and try to make this, a good nuanced intro. If you've been following the show, this is episode 6. You know this intro by now. If not, you're the first time here. Welcome to the channel. Listen to the other 5 as well. But of course, we know we cannot see the hearts of men. Only God can do that. But we can see the fruits, and we just want to look at like, okay, but if this person was a Christian businessman, a Christian music composer, a Christian scientist, like how would that show in their lives? And we've already said this like in the previous episodes as well. It's starting to turn more in like a theology / discipleship kind of show, because we're trying to identify these things. Like, okay, but what are those identifiers of a follower of Christ? What are those things, like if you are a famous scientist and known for all these things, but what would be things that we see in your life that would actually point us to like, oh, but you're also like really a follower of Christ? Or if you are a pirate, even we did a pirate, we did Francis Drake, pirate to the Spanish, hero to the British. We did Charlemagne. So it's really trying to see also within the context of their time, because very different days, to see like, okay, were they a Christian or not? And today, it's slightly different. Troy and I, we try to work on scripts, both of us, but as soon as we started working on this idea, I remember Troy mentioning the name of Woodrow Wilson, someone I do not know, but he said, I'm going to put him in. Like, I want to talk about this guy because so many people think he's a great guy. And maybe I'm spoiling it a little bit, but I think you got it from the intro. Troy, not a Woodrow Wilson fan.
No, so normally I try not to put, I mean, we do kind of put our thumb on the scale. We do kind of put our beliefs on display as we go through the story, but we do usually save the Christianish part kind of as we go. But again, if you know the name Woodrow Wilson, there's really nothing else. Like if that's someone you're familiar with, you're probably familiar with his incredibly not good legacy on the world. There are some people who will hear the story and go, "What are you talking about? I heard in U.S. history class he was a nice guy." But most people who are familiar with his name today are aware of quite not good legacy. What surprised me so much was how much of his story does look good on paper. The way I would say it almost is, if he had never become president, but he was just an elder at your church, I mean, I don't know that you would have ever you would look at him as probably a pretty good guy. It's probably a couple parts that you would definitely stand out, but he would have probably made a good elder at a lot of churches. So was it that he became president and he was able to practice a bunch of things that he was keeping hidden? What does it mean? He's a very complex man in terms of he shouldn't be what he is. Like and maybe it's naive, but as somebody who I read my Bible every day. I pray with God every day. I know it's not my works that save me. It's Christ that saves me. It's his work on the cross. But it is also undeniable that walking close with the Lord, reading scripture, following God has a huge impact on my spiritual life. And when people ask me, how can I grow closer to God? I say, well, are you reading your Bible? Are you praying? Are you spending time with him? Because we assume that those things should help your walk with God. And Woodrow Wilson is the first case of a guy, and maybe not the first case, but he's definitely the case of a guy who, on paper, he's doing everything he's supposed to be doing, but in practice, wow, is he making decisions that will hurt a whole lot of people? And one thing too about the show, that Christian or not, like, as you were talking, it just kind of made me think of this. Like, I look at Christian or not, and it's making me ask the question, like, if someone was looking at my life 200 years from now, like, what would they be looking at to see whether I actually meant my faith or not? And I think that's kind of like what we're doing. Like, the challenge from these shows should hopefully be as you go, like, oh man, if I am a Christian, I need it to be so outwardly. So just I hope that I am so outwardly displaying the love and faith I have in Jesus that 200 years from now, that's a very short episode of Christian or Not for me. It's for you. Like that, they're really, yeah, it's pretty obvious with these guys. I hope that they're not just sitting there wrestling and go, well, all this stuff got wrong too. And I think that's what we're going to do. But let's start with Woodrow. He's born in the 1800s, and and sometimes I also refer to him as America's most post-millennial Christian, and we'll kind of break that down. But he had a very firm idea that would be that that Jesus Christ was making this world progressively into a better place, and you will see that kind of play out in his beliefs here. But um, he's got this really big idea here that he's a very young man. He kind of grows up in the faith. He's in the Presbyterian background, a lot of strong, good Christian things happening. His dad is faithful in his life, and his family even takes in another famous Christian from that time. The Machen family, J. Gresham Machen, is a very famous Christian from the early 1900s, and his uncle will actually kind of go when he's having some trouble. Will actually go to Woodrow Wilson's family and spend time with them, so they'll be really close for life. So a very famous Christian man, J. Gresham Machen, will consider Woodrow Wilson his friend for quite a long time. And so like he has these deep connections with Christian people, a lot of Christian people that people alive today really look up to. They're still reading their books and they're still thinking of these guys as really solid guys, which again makes it all the more mysterious that Woodrow Wilson would appear from this group of people. If you imagine, a seminary or a Christian school or a Christian Bible college or something like that out there. And all these really great guys come from that place. But then this one guy comes out and everything he does is kind of like, what happened there? But he's still friends with all the other guys. It does make you go, okay, well, what's going on with these people? Like, there's something just very odd in his story that's different. But as a young man, one thing that was very, very important to him was politics. And you may say, maybe that's why he became president. Like,
Yeah, follow his trees.
like what your ass said. Maybe he wouldn't have said, I want to be president, but he would have been like, yeah, I'm really into the idea. And we see this, I believe it's his own father that goes off to be like, ends up being the governor of New Jersey or something. I'm sorry. No, it was J. Gresham Machen's father who becomes the governor of New Jersey. So like he's friends with these people who are in politics and stuff like that as well. Like they're all interconnected. So he's growing up in these environments where politics, you're sitting at the table and you're talking about the day's news, but the day's news are people you kind of know. As a friend of a friend and a relative and an uncle here and there. So you're feeling deeply connected. So it's not surprising to me. But he had these really firm beliefs, including like at a very young age, he said, quote, like his life should be about, quote, promoting the moral, intellectual, and physical improvement of his fellow man. Another quote he said is, you do this, how do you do that? So if your life is supposed to be promoting the physical, moral improvement of people, well, you do that by, quote, following the example and obeying the precepts of Christ in everything you do. And if you do that, you will, quote, raise the general prosperity of all classes of society and increase the sum of happiness and virtue, end quote.
I'm not hearing the evil just yet that you're saying towards. Like,
Where did I lose you? Son of modernist and follow God. So far, everything looks so good on
yeah,
paper. He seems like it, and you could sit there and say, well, it's a little wordy, it's a little philosophical, but come on, if you're running Sunday school with a bunch of like teenagers or young college age people, and someone says, I'm going to make my life goal to promote the raising up of people by following Jesus, yeah, you're gonna think that guy's great.
I mean, so far nothing from
So
me.
far, nothing.
I mean, this episode and the viewers, listeners are gonna notice like this is more me sitting on the sideline asking some of these questions. So, one question right now, like, um, what era are we in? Like, I know it's like
Late
early
1800s.
late 1800s, so not
The
yet.
late 1800s.
Okay,
He'll become, to give you an idea, he becomes president in 1912, and he will become the president of Princeton around, I think it's 1900 or 1904. So he's kind of like, this is kind of like mid to late 1800s era.
so that would put in like his sort of like formative years, like his growing up is like
Yeah.
right after his Civil War, right?
I was about to say his earliest memory is when Abraham Lincoln was made president. He heard some people saying America's going to war, and he says he ran home and said, "Dad, I heard Abraham Lincoln became president, and America's going to go to war." And his dad was like, "Yeah, actually, like it's going to happen now because Abraham Lincoln became president." And a couple months later, the war kind of kicks off. But that was like his earliest memory is this idea like America's going to war. Which again, if that's the world you're growing up in, you can see why politics would be such a big deal. Your earliest memory is a political moment that led to
So our whole country.
that ripped the country I have. Which, by the way, if you're wondering which side of that divide Woodrow Wilson and his family were on, firmly south. His dad, a Presbyterian minister, helped create the Presbyterian Confederate churches as the Presbyterian church split during this time. He helped, like, he wasn't the only guy, but he was a part of helping to found the southern side of that. They were firmly in that camp. And now, Mark, you may be concerned, did they own slaves? No, they rented them from the church. So the church owned and would rent one out to people, and the Wilson family rented their slave. Where did that leave you?
I'm just trying to grasp the concept. Like, was this like a money making scheme for the
I
church?
don't know. And I look, when I think of renting something, I'm old enough to remember going to a Blockbuster where you would pick a video off, and it sounds pretty gross to imagine that as like I'm going to rent a slave. And then when I think of the churches, the people running that it does not make me feel good.
I have some concerns. Let me put it like that. If my church was doing this, I would probably send in a strongly worded
It
letter
would be
to the elders. Like,
like PSAG discussions, like, hey, maybe we shouldn't rent people. I don't know. It's just some firm ideas out there. And again, when the Civil War breaks out, the Wilson family is saying like, whoa, 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 we're on the keep going with this side of things. They're very pro the South, and in fact, Woodrow Wilson, when he gets elected, he will be the first like Southern president elected since the Civil War era because of the firm feelings against it. And the Democrats, after the Civil War, don't win very many presidencies because they were on the wrong side of that Civil War. And he won't be the first Democrat president elected when he becomes president, but he'll be the first in over 20 years. And so he's kind of and when you look at what he stands for, he's kind of a return of that era in many ways.
that's a confusing thing to me still, because if we follow like the news right now, like it's always Democrats, progressives, liberals, and the Republicans are like the conservatives. But back in the day, it was flipped around, or how did that work?
So the Republican Party was created to fight slavery. Abraham Lincoln's entire, like one of his biggest platform positions was we're going to end slavery. It was an abolition party. And so there was never a time when the Republican Party was like, hey, let's put, people into slavery. That was never their thing.
Yeah.
I don't know how I've heard we're not a politics podcast, so we won't get into all the discussions of the.
Sorry, I'm just trying to understand here from there.
But I do think it's important to clarify because I'm sure we have listeners all around the world who are going to be hearing this, and I cannot tell you how many times I meet people overseas who they're like, wait, no, the Democrats were the pro-slave side of that, and you're like, yes, actually, like they were in fact the pro. And it's funny to me too because when the 1964 civil rights legislation gets passed, Lyndon B. Johnson will sign it. It will be passed, and they'll be like, the Democrats passed it. And it's like, well, the Democrats joined the Republicans in passing it, but they were fighting against the other Democrats that voted against it. Like all the people who voted against that legislation were Democrats. All the Republicans voted for it, and then a few Democrats joined to get it to pass through Congress to then be signed by a Democrat president. So yes, Democrats signed it, but it was also the Democrats who kept it from being signed and that they had to go up against, if that makes
Well,
sense.
I'm learning new stuff here about
There you go, American politics. It's an issue that has, again, it's just always been odd to me how that became murky, and I think people like Woodrow Wilson are a part of this story where when if you have just gone to basic history class, you've just learned a little bit about him, and you're not going to know what we're about to talk about because this very important part of his legacy is left out. If you've done research kind of outside that, then what we're about to get to doesn't surprise you. Back to him, at the age of 20, he writes an essay called Christ's Army. And I, for one, can't remember any of the theological essays I wrote. Actually, I do. When I was about 20, I had to write an essay in Bible college on Jan Hus. I had to pick a guy from church history. And it was really, I was like, this guy's an amazing guy. And I think actually part of the reason I love church history was that paper. So you know what? Maybe those papers we write when we're in our 20s do matter. You wouldn't know that anymore. If you're a younger listener, you're going, the paper chat GPT writes for me matters. It does actually. Um, but he imagined life as a war between good and evil that played out around us every day. It's full of these kind of quotes of seeing that if you're a Christian, are a part of Christ's army fighting this war against Satan all around you. One of the quotes it speaks of how we're supposed to quail before the uplifted swords of the spirit. A battle is progressing all around you, and quote, the army of saints ever gains ground under the divine generalship. Now slowly, then rapidly, driving before them with irresistible force the broken ranks of the enemies, end quote. And he saw the generals, by the way, as pastors. There was no place for compromise on principle, quote, there is no middle course, no neutrality. Each one must enlist either with the followers of Christ or those of Satan. And you can see if you understand eschatology, like he's seeing this world will be reclaimed for Christ. This army of God will win the battle. It's slowly, fast, whatever it is, over time, Satan's already lost the battle, and eventually it's just a divine. It's you're either shooting at the enemy or not, but it will be won. The army is happening. Are you following this conquering for Christ? And once again, if I knew a 20-year-old who wrote something like that, um, good.
yeah.
That's what I want to see, right?
I'm putting another check in the yes box here.
If you're hearing that you're sending your kids off to college, you're nervous about what they're going to learn, and at 20 they send you back Christ's Army, you're going to be feeling pretty good about like the direction that young man's headed in. Yeah, he's using some, this and that. Maybe I don't agree with everything he says, but I like his heart. I like his passion for God. And even just that line, there is no neutral ground. I mean, I do kind of agree with that, right? Like that's a good point that I think even today.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
that's him at 20. So he's very fired up for God. So then what happens? He gets involved with speaking. He goes off to university. Now, his family has always been big on evolution. The Presbyterian Church had a big wrestle during this time with do we accept evolution or not? The Machen family was in that camp too. That's part of the reason they became friends, big evolutionists. And as he kind of went off into these different universities and stuff, he became the intellectual, the very smart guy, read a lot of books. So what goes wrong in Wilson's story? Where does he kind of mess up? Well, I mean, there may have been signs of this already, but as he's getting older, as he goes off to college, he goes to Johns Hopkins University and eventually gets involved with Princeton. He becomes the intellectual, and the intellectual things that are happening in the late 1800s. Evolution is a big part of that. We also see, alongside evolution, the idea of eugenics. Darwin creating the origin of the species. The subtitle of that is Survival of the Fittest of the Races. There's this idea that some races are better than others, and it was very much a part of Darwin's work, and it was very much a part of the evolutionary string of thought at the time. Well, Woodrow Wilson will become heavily involved in that. Some of this might have already kind of appealed to his family's nature anyway. Remember, they were on the Confederate side of the South. Anyway, many people who were on the Confederate side over time, they switched their beliefs or realized they were wrong on some of those issues, but some of them did not. And, or whatever it was, though, it became intellectually in vogue to look down on people who were of a different race and to see them as lesser than. And it may not have been I would not say that's what every person who has ever subscribed to the idea of evolution believes, but it was certainly a part of some of the early beliefs of evolution. And it will certainly be part of Woodrow Wilson's beliefs, which we will see as he gets going. Now, eventually, he becomes the president of Princeton University. He has arrived at his first kind of position of power. And one of the very first, now, by the way, there are two Princetons. I didn't know this originally. There's Princeton University.
I didn't know there was even one.
It's one of those famous schools there in America. Princeton is kind of like one of the Ivy Leagues, the big boys, right? Right next to Yale and Harvard. And Kirk
I know those ones. I don't know how I missed.
from the this was it.
Is that a university? So anything good? Yeah, I'm not.
But Princeton is a big one. And originally, Princeton Theological Seminary, a bunch of really famous Christians from J. Gresham Machen, which I mentioned earlier, to B.B. Warfield, like the Hodge family members. Like, this can be a real hub of really good Christians have come out of that part of the world. Well, sorry. Well, Princeton's university is next door to it. Like, it was created, Princeton Theological Seminary was created when it looked like Princeton University kind of went too secular. So they're kind of like two different parts, but they're almost the same. Like, the president of one becomes the president of the other. Professors of one become professors of, like, they're very much intermingled. In fact, J. Gresham Machen will be a professor at the seminary, but he'll regularly go hang out with his friend Woodrow, who's president of the university. Like, these two, they're not the same, but they're super enmeshed with each other, and they back and forth a lot. So while he's president of Princeton University, he's friends with these guys that are great Christians that are writing great stuff. A famous Christian, Charles Spurgeon, calls them the Princeton worthies. They're fighting for biblical inerrancy during their time. And then Woodrow Wilson will do something. He will segregate Princeton University. So he will say black students and white students are not supposed to be in the same place at the same time. We're gonna push. I'm not sure if they were allowed in the same classroom, but they're not allowed to sit together in the same classroom anymore. They're not going to be roommates anymore. Princeton University had a long history of allowing people from different races to commingle. Again, it was not a part of the South. They didn't have any of those problems necessarily. But under Woodrow Wilson, not any longer they are not to. They are going to start preaching and teaching this idea of eugenics. And this is going to be the same guy who's going to get up. And people loved his speeches when he would give speeches during chapels and stuff. One of the people I read basically was like, nothing was better than when a speaker canceled and our president Woodrow would have to get up and give a sermon off the cuff. He gave, he would have the entire campus enthralled because he would just be speaking from the heart. And yet, at the same time, this is the same guy who is now segregating the campus and saying one group of people is lesser than another group of people, and that we're not going to treat them as the same, and we're going to actually treat them quite a bit worse here. Now Princeton University, he has some other things start to happen to him during this time. For example, he starts to become very stressed out. One day he will wake up and he won't be able to see out of one of his eyes. Today, doctors I read, not good. Doctors I read said that they believed he had a stroke. At the time, the doctors said he had hardened arteries. But either way, the prescription was pretty much the same. You're too stressed out. You need to calm down. He's the president of a university. I can see how that'd be very stressful. He's going through a very tumultuous time too. Like, academically, universities are being pushed. Europe has gone in this very liberal direction, kind of abandoning the Bible and kind of embracing all of these criticisms and things like that. Princeton is kind of under that pressure to do the same. And Woodrow's hand is kind of lightly bringing them down that path. He's not necessarily doing it very directly, but he is like, let's be smart, let's be intellectual, let's be academic. And the president, he kind of chooses to come after him, will push aside like conservative speakers and openly embrace more of these kind of the Bible is inerrant kind of people. It'll be a slow step, but they're walking in that direction. And Woodrow's a key link in that bridge. But he's stressed out, so his family goes on vacation. And while they're on vacation, Woodrow will meet a very nice lady, which could be a really nice story, except he's already married.
I was about to ask actually, because he said he's going on a holiday with his
family, and they meet a really nice lady, and he really connects with this gal, and they become very, very firm pen pals. Now, historians want you to know there's no evidence that he ever cheated on his wife. But if I read the letters to you and I asked you, I didn't tell you whose names they were, and I asked you to tell me which letters are to his wife and which letters are to this other person, and I don't think, Mark, you would be able to tell. They are firmly written in very much the same ways. And in fact, you might actually start to guess in the wrong direction, because sometimes the letters to this other woman are almost more flowery. He would always call her his beloved, for example. He would speak very sweetly of his eternal happiness in her, etc. not the way I hope any. I hope no one's listening and going, "What's the problem?" I do that with all my friends.
Yeah, leave a comment if you want to talk to you. We have
Need to get you to a good biblical counselor or something because I think you're off a little bit there. This is really bad. Now his wife knows about this and encourages this, which is very strange. Your wives don't encourage your husbands to write types like this to other women.
this is already my third, like, I have some questions, and this is the first one that's actually directly about Woodrow himself. But this is very strange. Let me put it like that. Like first of all, that he's doing it, very strange. Like that's just a major red flag, I think, in a relationship when someone has like, and maybe this wasn't a known thing back then, but like now I think we also talk about things like emotional cheating, like getting more emotionally involved with someone
I
else.
feel like they
Like
probably
this is
knew
way,
the
yeah.
idea of it, though. I'm sure they may not have used the same language we did, but I'm sure they were aware of the concept.
Yeah, but then the wife also encouraging it really makes me question, like, was she even like happy in this marriage? Like, what's going on here?
Actually, she was not happy. But the reason she was not happy was because the year before, her brother was also a professor at Princeton. His wife and their newly born child were in a carriage crossing over a bridge. The bridge collapsed, the carriage went into the water, and the entire family drowned and died. And then this news reached her and reached her only other brother. And that caused her other brother, he was so devastated by the loss of that family that he had a complete mental collapse and had to be like put in an asylum. So she went into a deep like pit of depression and she felt like basically I'm horrible, I'm awful, I'm depressed, like I'm just broken. So she encouraged Woodrow, like basically like, oh, you're happy, go find some happiness. I'm glad that you're finding happiness right now. And I don't think that's healthy.
No,
We're not a bed we're not burial counselors, but I think that I can say with some confidence that that's not.
yeah, yeah, like I don't even have to like open my Bible and say like, hey, this is like you need some help. You need to talk to someone.
If you're feeling really depressed because your entire family died in a carriage drowning accident, that's understandable, but don't push your husband emotionally into the arms of another woman. That's not going to be the best for your family in the long run. I feel like I can give that advice and firmly stand by. I don't think I'd be able to pass incident diversions that prove me wrong. And so that's kind of what happened with those two. And they kept this a secret for a long time. And it will come out later, but it'll come out for a very different reason. And it will cause Woodrow some trouble when this eventually comes out. Now, again, historians, all of the scholars will say there's no proof of an affair. But at one point, he will be on an island. Like they go down to this island, like Jamaica or somewhere regularly. That's kind of like their vacation that they do. And at one point, he will go to Jamaica and write to his wife, "Oh, I ran into her there. What a surprise!" And they spend a month together by themselves on this island because he happened to run into her.
Yeah, that's one of those things like, okay, maybe there is no proof,
But geez,
but you're going to help in your case.
like scholars and historians, you guys, I don't want to be rude, but you're being a little dense here. Like, well, there's no direct proof, there's no black and white photo of them in the room together. Okay, but I mean, this is not
Is that what you want?
like that, right? Okay, but they happened to land on the same island and spend a month together while he was on vacation. I mean, let me ask you this. If your significant other landed on an island and happened to spend a month with a guy, with either a guy or girl, they write letters back and forth, would you accept that as accept? Would you go, well, there's proof that you,
Like, I don't know. Like, this is just a coincidence.
wasn't amazing was don't think it's going to hold up very well.
Let me put it like this. If that's you listening to this podcast, I have a great investment opportunity for you.
You need to sign some Revive Studios crypto coins because you seem like a very sincere person who believes things. Yeah, so that's a big side scandal, a part of his story that I think is worth mentioning, and it's certainly worth mentioning when we're evaluating his Christianity, but it doesn't necessarily have a whole lot to do with his presidency and decisions. Which you're like, oh, I thought you said President of the United States. You're talking about President Princeton. No. But that you just said he needs to get less stressed because he's having strokes. I did say that. So he decides that he doesn't like being president of Princeton, and he approaches the Democrat Party of New Jersey at the time and basically goes like, hey, I want to get into politics. I'm done being president of Princeton. And he literally, like, the quote is basically like, I want to get into politics, and I don't want to be anybody's VP, if you know what I mean. So he's pretty firmly putting himself out there. I'm presidential material, right? Like, I'm the big dog. Put me in there. This nobody who's never been elected to any office ever is directly approaching a party saying, would you run me for president? And I don't know if he understands what the position of president of the United States is like, but that's not a less stressful job, I think, than the current one that he holds.
I don't know, like 1912 was when he became president. That seems like a perfectly easy year
That's it.
to become president.
And that is a good time to be president. The early 1900s, nothing bad happens. So that's good. He does end up, so it's kind of a crazy story, but like the New Jersey Democrats had lost every election for a long time. And they were kind of like, well, he's a professor. He has no connection to politics, really. What if we run him and just kind of see what happens? And he'll look like the outside candidate that's super clean cut. He's got a PhD, he's a smart guy, and let's see what happens. Now, the cynical people like say that the Democrat Party also had like a very corrupt machinery, and they were like, this newbie will be very easy to control, but the public will think he's a nice guy. That's exactly what happened. Everyone was like, wow, he seems like a really nice guy. He's not corrupt like all the other politicians. He's just a smart professor. They elected him. They did not find that actually Woodrow Wilson was very easy to control. He had very strong ideals of how to run things, and the Democrat Party actually got cut out of power. He passed a bunch of rules like defaming them because he was like, I'm sorry, these don't agree with my ideals that I came up with in Princeton, and you're kind of out of here, guys. And that made him super popular because he stood down this political machinery. He truly acted like the outsider. And that got his name into the ring for president of the United States. Well, the presidency that is running in 1912 is a fascinating one because it's one of the few in American history where there was a legitimate third-party candidate that actually received votes. And not only was there a third-party candidate that received votes, there was actually a fourth-party candidate that received votes. In fact, the Socialists of America had their best ever year with 1 million votes with Eugene Debs, who ran part of his campaign from the prison where he was shoved into for being a socialist. And that was their best ever. Like, they've never done better than that guy. The other person running is Theodore Roosevelt, who had already been president, but he decided to run as a third-party Bull Moose candidate, and I believe Bull Moose Party candidate, I believe is the name of it.
I was going to ask a question there. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a new party, and you may have noticed that in recent elections, you don't remember any Bull Moose Party people running. And that's because they didn't do super good. And so Roosevelt did not win in this third party, but he basically, at the time, the president was a Republican, but he wasn't very popular. Things weren't going super well. And Roosevelt was like, I kind of agree with the Republicans, but I have new ideas. I want to do something new. So he tried to found a new party. Those two end up splitting the votes, and so Woodrow Wilson will win. Now, Woodrow wasn't exactly the guy. In fact, when the Democrats were trying to pick the nominee, he was very low on the list, but this very kind of corrupt mob boss guy put all his weight behind this other guy, and everyone didn't want to help him out, so they all ran to other candidates. 46 votes later, Woodrow won enough votes to become the nominee. So the Democrats,
They had to vote 46 times, like 46 rounds.
6 rounds of voting to get him to the nominee of Democrat Party. And when he wins the presidency, he doesn't win with like this overwhelming majority. It's pretty clear that if Theodore Roosevelt and Eugene Debs hadn't been there, I don't think we would have had a Woodrow Wilson presidency. He barely wins the Democrat nomination, and he barely wins the presidency. But don't let that stop you, Woodrow. He walks into the White House like he won a clear vendetta, like the American people made it clear from God, I'm supposed to be here in this moment. And as he's getting inaugurated, I don't know if it's true or not, but the myth, at least the legend, is he kind of turned to one of his friends. He said, wouldn't it be the biggest irony in history if my presidency is remembered for its foreign affairs? Which is like, I'm the guy who's going to fix America from the inside. Wouldn't it be funny if I was remembered for things that happen overseas?
Good. That is some great foreshadowing there. And shadows.
I got some news for you. 1914, 2 years later, World War I kicks off, and Woodrow Wilson is going to be famous for, in 1916, running against World War I, saying, we will not commit any boys to Europe. Europe can fight its own wars. Sorry, you guys, you're on your own, which we held to until Woodrow Wilson got reelected. And about 2 months later, he said, by the way, we're going to put some soldiers in Europe. And very quickly,
speaking for Europe, I think that was good for us. Like, I think it really helped.
So I would give Woodrow Wilson credit for this. I would say, yeah, you know what? I'm glad that you guys got some help from the 1 million American fresh soldiers that came into the Allies and kind of cleared things up. But I'm not going to give Woodrow Wilson credit because the person he ran against said, hey, I'm not saying we will go to war, but I'm saying that if the situation needs us to go to war, I'm open to having to go to war and help Europe. Woodrow ran very clearly on under no conditions will we go to war in Europe. 4 months later, he's announcing time for war in Europe. And I'm like, okay, you don't get to protect, like, that is, to me, that's pretty scummy. He basically knew war in Europe would be unpopular. So if the other guy says he's open to it, I'll say no, get reelected, and then we'll change things once I'm reelected. To me, that is totally a politician move. There's no way things changed that much in those 6 months that he really genuinely had to change his heart.
So let me do like a little bit of like a temperature check here. Like, okay, so he's had his first 4 years of presidency. You said he was coming in with some new ideals.
Yeah, let me get into that. So
Like, I'm more interested in those. Like what was
So-
what were the 4 years?
yeah, let me get through some of those policies because so far, again, we've only seen that one segregation on Princeton. Well, now that he has the ultimate power, he unleashes it all. For starters, in anybody should feel annoyed by this. He brought the income tax back, which had been it had been tried out in America during the Civil War. Once the Civil War was paid off, they undid it. They were like, okay, no more income tax. In 1812, Woodrow Wilson was like, hey boys, what income tax is back. He promised it would be temporary, but if you're in America, you know that it's still a very long temporary. And he also brought in what's called the Federal Reserve that was placed under him. I'm not an economist enough to understand everything the Federal Reserve does, but I do know that it was supposed to help with the American dollar, and that the value of the American dollar is like 2% of what it was in 1912. So that didn't work out very well. There's a reason why your grandpa could buy like a house with a nickel and you can't. And that is a lot of that is some
I
like
think there's some truth to that, but there's also, I don't know, there's just this economic principle of like inflation, like money needs to keep it needs to keep moving. I don't know.
the Federal Reserve is where that idea comes from. Like before that, everything was backed by gold, and you would have these kind of gold bust cycles where money would go up. Then once there wasn't gold to catch up, it would kind of crash back down. It was very normal and cyclical. The Federal Reserve, and then it will be expanded on by FDR, is, and we're not trying to get into economics here, I'm not one, but the idea is basically like we can control that cycle. We can keep the cycle from being so bad that you're wiping out entire markets all at once, which is a natural way the markets play out. But instead, we'll kind of control the fall. The fall will, you'll never get as high as you once did, but you'll never get as low anymore. We're going to kind of try to put our hand to these forces, but these forces are far bigger than what can be controlled. And so what ended up happening was runaway inflation, to the point that 100 years later, things have just gotten into a very different place. And the people who were writing against the Federal Reserve and were against the US said, like, hey, if we do this, our children's children will have dollars that are worth nothing. And I mean, like, the dollar's not worth nothing, but we did just get rid of the penny. So, I mean, like, we are getting to a plane where, like, if we're trying to say the Federal Reserve was a great idea, the people who criticized it, their theories turned out for the most part correct. Um, totally. But that's economic stuff. Let's get to the stuff that really matters to us. How he handles races. Did he get better? No. The federal government was immediately segregated, white people, black people. The idea of the
And this was his idea. Like before with Russell,
yeah.
everyone working together.
And that's something that's really important. Like when you look at American history, many of you have read To Kill a Mockingbird or something like that. You know that the South was segregated. You know that there was a time when black people went to one water fountain and white people went to another. And it's very easy to have this kind of idea, this illusion that as soon as the Civil War ended, um, like the Southerners walked over and took all the water fountains. That's kind of how most of us would think of it. That is incorrect. There was actually a period of time where everyone was kind of like they weren't getting along, but everything was okay-ish. And if you were going through America, there weren't black water fountains and white water fountains. There was about a 20-year gap where everything was just kind of there. And I'm not saying everything was racially great. I'm sure there were problems, especially in different parts where the old Confederacy South. I'm sure they weren't all hunky dory. Where did this idea of the Jim Crow laws and stuff, if I recall correctly, this one's from memory. Jim Crow gets passed in 1895. That's 30 years after the American Civil War. Well, why did all this stuff start up later? It goes back to that evolution eugenics idea. The idea that some races have evolved and become superior to others led to the idea that these people should not be interacting with these people. This is not coming from some evil racial prejudice that was rooted in slavery like it's often taught. This came from an evil prejudice that was rooted in science. It was rooted in the idea that people evolved and were becoming something. That's why, by the way, these eugenicists were extremely focused on not letting people have children together that were not of the same race. They really believed that you wouldn't let a monkey and a human have a child. Well, and these are not my words, be very clear, but they really saw it as the same. They were like, if a European and African have children, it's basically going backwards in evolution. They're not the same species. And so how dare you let them interact like they were? And as crazy as that sounds, look it up and Google it if you don't believe me. They took a person from Africa and put him in a zoo in New York. Theodore Roosevelt and many famous people went and saw this guy and they treated him and they had him actually hold a baby monkey to emphasize the point that this person is an animal. Now, if that's your perspective, then you're segregating different species. And that's the perspective of Woodrow Wilson as he segregates the government, as he segregates the Navy. The Navy was like, we're all on the boat. How can we be segregated? And Woodrow Wilson said, figure it out because you are not the same species. You're not going to be together. There were some black civil rights leaders that came to him and they basically were like, what are you doing? Like, this is absolute madness. You're setting us back so far. Like, how could you go backwards? And he said to them basically, I'm going to try and quote this from memory because I'm not seeing it in my notes here. But he basically said, you gentlemen should be happy with what I'm doing. I'm doing what's best for all of us. And there was a woman who met him during this time. And she said, I've met many people from around the world. She was like, but I've never met somebody who didn't like a single black person like Woodrow Wilson. Like, he has a hatred and an issue there that's so much deeper. Like, there's a lot of racists, but he's like their king who says.
This is crazy to me, but also trying to think a little bit bigger than just Woodrow Wilson, because of course he's the president, but he doesn't have like absolute power. Like, this is apparently like a bigger movement than happening as well in this.
Well, so that's something Woodrow Wilson pushes. So in the so if you try to name people presidents from the late 1800s, I can name some of them like McKinley and but like most people are like, I don't know, it's like Abraham Lincoln and Woodrow Wilson. Like there's actually like, and maybe Theodore Roosevelt, but there's like a blank space in people's minds. That was intentional. There's a reason why it's not just recency bias because I can name Herbert Hoover or FDR, and those are recent per se, but you probably know their names. Why can you know the names of these guys, but not necessarily people from the 1800s? Well, the American founders, the idea was the president's not a king. Just because one president wants something, he shouldn't be able to completely control the federal government and enforce it. But the same Woodrow Wilson that wasn't going to let the New Jersey Democrat machine tell him what to do also wasn't fixing to let the United States government tell him what to do. One of the reasons presidencies became so important was because Woodrow Wilson extended his power out to the absolute max that he could and would pull the levers of power in ways that no other president really had done before him. The reason why, normally people would stand up and say, you can't segregate the entire earth, this and that. He didn't care. He made his rules and basically was like, how are you going to stop me? Like, come after me if you want. And it was intellectually in vogue to believe what he was believing. All the high academics. I mean, he's got a PhD. He's from Princeton. He's the smart guy. You guys are the backwater dummies who are talking about the image of God and all that. But you're the ones who are behind on the times. He's the one who is kind of forward thinking, going where they need to go. And it's really gross too, because a lot of these ideas that he's pushing for, I mean, it will even go up to Hitler will say when he's kind of putting together his own programs in Germany, he will look at the American South and be like, look what they did. It worked. Like, that's what we're looking for here. Like, they got their people segregated.
That's never a great society when those people are looking at what you're doing. That's what I
Well,
want.
it is one of he was looking at the South and said, that's the blueprint. Like that they're keeping them away from each other. That's what we want to do too. So
The goof.
this is what the intellectuals of the world are thinking. This is the big stuff in the universities around the world is that word. And he's friends with a guy. His name is like Cluckenwild or something like that. That's not correct, but it's something like really long like that. And this guy will go over to, no, that's not what he's friends with. Sorry. It's the butcher of Cluckenwild or something like that. You can tell I'm not looking at my notes as much for this episode. I apologize for that. But this guy,
He's a real Troy rant.
yeah, this is really me ranting, but he's friends with this guy who's a eugenicist who will go off to run a concentration camp in Germany. And like, as far as we know, they're friends till their final days. Now, Woodrow Wilson dies in like 1924. The concentration camps happened 15 years later. But that's the kind of guys he's running with, that he, quote, admires and respects those kinds of people. The kind of people who later on run concentration camps. That's the kinds of people. And we're still not done with him on race, because he has several more. Under his administration, several race riots happened where white people like lynched and killed black people. He never sent in the National Guard. He did nothing to help out. He didn't care. He also, the KKK, famous group of people. Again, a lot of people think the KKK ruled the South for 100 and something years. Not true. The KKK showed up right after the Civil War. Then they went away, and then they came back. Well, why did they come back? Well, Woodrow Wilson helped edit a textbook on the South. And in that textbook, he talked about the KKK and how they were these romantic, adventurous knights that protected white people from the scourge of other people. And I'm using nicer language than he is, because this will be on YouTube and we'll get we will get shut down for using the language he does. So know that what I'm saying is the more clean version than what he said. And he romanticized them. They put this textbook out, and this group of people turned it into a movie, and they said, "We pulled some of your quotes, Woodrow. Can we show you this movie?" And so he had it screened at the White House. The movie is called Birth of a Nation. It is an extremely racist movie about how the white South was oppressed and needed to rise up, all that stuff. It glorified the KKK and the Ku Klux Klan that you're familiar with, that you've seen pictures of. That's the KKK that was birthed in the 1920s based on the support it gained from this movie, The Birth of a Nation.
Wait, we got to back up a moment there, because you said screened at the White House, like he's like having like his own
He
doing
invited
part.
them to see it, to screen it, to give him their stamp of approval from the White House. We like this movie. And like, even if you don't agree with the movie, if the president's putting a stamp of approval on it, it's very hard to argue that it's not a at least somewhat mainstream position. Of course, it was extremely racist, extremely backward, extremely wrong, but it purported these ideas that some races are higher and some races are lower. And that's just science at the time in 1915. Like, what are you going to do? Stand against science and be wrong? Not Woodrow. He's pushing forward with these ideas.
He's a he's a pioneer of science and new ideas.
Yeah, new ideals that are really backwards and worse than the previous ideas were.
Yeah.
So that alone should make you, if you're listening, go, "Oh my gosh, he cheats on his wife and he does all that." But we're not even.
Is there still any, like, in this whole eugenics thing, because you did mention like man made in the image of God. So would they say like this is evolution, and the eugenics is kind of like also a um I've got to say, right, like a post-millennial kind of idea as well, where it's like mankind is becoming better and this is the best
Yeah,
version
say
of
what?
mankind?
Now I know there's some people who are listening. You're like, "I'm a post-millennial. What do you say?" No, I promise you, this is not like the idea of Jesus coming, like that we're winning on earth, all of that stuff. Yes, he's agreeing to that. Obviously, I don't think post-millennials. I hope so they are not affirming anything that Woodrow Wilson is. I wouldn't put that on them anyway. That would be very, that we're not gonna take the worst.
Also, not what my question meant. I was just saying, like, was he putting those?
Like he was putting these ideas together. He saw it as a complete package. Like, as man evolved into the great, splendid form that humanity is rising above its earlier animal, and as we're kidding, and we're gonna eventually reach this utopian state. And he very much saw it. A part of how he sees that is in the end of World War One. It's called the Covenant of the League of Nations. Now, by the way, we mentioned, and history kind of treats him like he was a beleaguered president, but when time got tough, he had to go to war and save Europe. False. He he sent armies out of America multiple times. I'm going to try to list from memory all the countries he invaded before World War One. But they are not a small number of nations. He sent soldiers into Mexico 11 different times, including a 4,000 person army. He almost started multiple wars with Mexico, because most countries don't like when an army of people show up on your border.
Generally, not a great diplomatic.
No, a good way. No. He also sent soldiers to Haiti because he didn't like who they were electing to be their president. So he decided to change the president by encouraging a new one, which is not normally encouraging. It works. He sent them to Costa Rica. Like, he sent so many different people. I wish I had pulled the list up. It's a very long script that I've done with Woodrow Wilson in the past, and it's like literally 15 different countries he sent to. The guy was not a peacemaker kind of guy. So this idea that, like, oh, he never wanted to send anybody anywhere, but he had to when the chips were down to save Europe. No, he kept sending people to other countries, and eventually he sent some of them to Europe, but he was by no means peaceful. Now, if I can give him a little bit of credit, Supposedly, he did come up with a plan to free the Philippines and get them started on independence that would get them out of America's hand. America won the Philippines in the in the war against Spain. Didn't really know what to do with the Philippines, and supposedly Woodrow Wilson helped to kind of get the Philippines independent, uh, and also Puerto Rico. So not everything he did was necessarily like 100% evil. With that said, though, Puerto Rico is still a part of America, so I guess his plan there didn't fully come to conclusion. Gets to the end of World War I, sends the soldiers over, they fight. He calls it the war to end all wars. He genuinely believes World War I, they didn't call it World War I back then, they call it the Great War. But he genuinely believes when that war is over, there will be no more wars left in humanity. He believes that the world is giving like Satan is throwing his last battle punch against the world in World War I. And if we can win this war, the right sides can win this war, we can end all war. And he gets his academics, his really smart people together and says, come up with a plan of points that I can stand by that can make the world a better place. And they come up with 14 points, one of which is the covenant of the League of Nations. And notice I said covenant. Many people have heard of the United Nations. Well, before the United Nations, there was the League of Nations, which is famous for basically failing, but it's actually the covenant of the League of Nations. And that language covenant was very important to Woodrow Wilson. He wanted its headquarters to be in Geneva because John Calvin ran a very Christian city in Geneva. That was its headquarters, and he wants that headquarters to flow out for the covenant of the League of Nations. He wanted all the nations to make a covenant before God, allowing all the nations to work together and enter a state of secular world peace that would eventually lead to like Christ-filled world peace. And when World War I is over and he heads to America, like Europe loves him. I mean, America helped basically end the war with 1 million fresh troops into the trenches, and Germany couldn't survive that. And so it was a really big deal. People were very happy. And so Woodrow Wilson then becomes the first sitting U.S. president to visit Europe while being president, and everyone's excited. People in America are kind of annoyed because they're kind of like, hey, like, don't get involved in Europe. Like, be over here. Like, we have a tradition of kind of ignoring Europe.
You got involved in a war that we didn't even want to be in, and so you're over there roaring.
We're like, hey, you're not supposed to be. This is royalty stuff. Like, we're not Europeans. Like, get over here and run America and stop sending random soldiers into Mexico every 5 minutes, right? Like, this is not what we're supposed to be doing over here. But he decides to go over there and do that. And when he gets there, Europe at first loves them. They're throwing parades. One guy writes a poem making a very like intricate comparison between him and the shepherd of the Lord. Like, it's really deep. And he writes back like, not what I would write, which is like, hey man, thanks for the poem, but that's kind of heresy. But he writes back like, your poem touched my heart, made me cry, blah, blah, blah. Like he really loved the idea that he's like basically Jesus there. But when he gets there, he quickly ticks off everybody because he's like, I have 14 points to fix your wars, Europe. I'm going to fix you. And the people in charge were kind of like, oh, like we actually just want to make Germany pay for World War I and take a bunch of territories and business as usual. And Woodrow's kind of like, no, I know how to fix Europe. You guys are stupid, but my scholars and I came up with a plan. And it starts with this League of Nations. And you guys don't, the reason you guys do war is because you're not listening to us. And I'm sure that made Europe really happy with America in that moment.
I'm just thinking because like looking at this, thinking about this, like, I mean, this is maybe like a really like short and short-sighted view on things, but like there was so much happening in World War One. Like so many borders were like remade. Countries even didn't exist before, existed after. Like there were like ethnic groups. It was like Europe was really in a very formative period here, and like just looking at like France and Germany, like that border region that just kept shifting over and over for hundreds of years was again now they were trying to shift, and then this guy just shows up like, hey, Europe, I know you've been fighting, but I have a great idea. Let me just,
Yeah.
work this out for you. It
Well,
just sounds.
but you just made the case for why it's a good thing God sent Woodrow Wilson. For hundreds of years, you guys have been so confused and fighting wars and didn't know what to do. Praise God. I think it was the French prime minister who said even Moses only had 10 commandments, guy. Like they did not like his 14 points at all. And every time like they got into a conflict, like should this colony go to France or Germany? Blah blah blah. I mean, France and Germany are cutting up the world. They're like the Middle East is ours. This is ours. We're taking all these lands. And then they get interrupted by Woodrow being like, in a covenant of League of Nations. Like, it's literally like that. Like, he is on one track. Him and his scholars came up with a solution to world peace. And the only reason Europeans are jumping into the pit is because they're just too stupid to realize that greatness has arrived. It's Italy at one point will basically, like, say, like, hey, if we don't get this land, we're walking away from this whole thing. And Woodrow Wilson is like, I know what to do. So he pulls out a typewriter, he writes a letter to Italy. And I'm gonna basically summarize it. It's not exactly this, but it's basically like, Italy, you recognize goodness when you see it. You realize how brilliant the 14 points and the Covenant of the League of Nations is. I speak directly to you, the Italian people. Get your leaders on board with our plans because they're going to lead you down the wrong way. And you're smart enough to realize goodness when you see it. The Italians do not respond well to that. They basically look, since that they don't, they states all get destroyed. And like Italy's relationship with America, like immediately starts to go down south. Woodrow actually said very originally on, like, we're not going to make Germany pay for the war. We're not going to like treat any victors or losers because that will just sow the seeds of the next war. Woodrow was correct. Making Germany pay for the war did sow the seeds of the next war. But that's because they did make it pay. You see, Germany and Britain said, nice ideas, America, Woodrow, but we're going to make them pay for the war. Woodrow's like, well, you shouldn't. And they said, we will not join the Covenant of the League of Nations if you do not make Germany pay for the war. And Woodrow was like, let's not get hasty. The Covenant of the League of Nations will bring world peace. And Britain and France very quickly realized that's the one piece he won't give up. So whenever you were arguing with Woodrow, if you just threatened the Covenant of the League of Nations, he would back down on anything.
So, in his defense, then here, would it be fair to say if everyone was on board, would it have worked? Do you think it would have worked?
I think that if they hadn't made Germany pay for World War I, if they had been a little bit gentler on Germany, because like, look, in World War II, Germany's the bad guys. I feel pretty confident we can all say that they made the mistakes. But in World War I, like the entangling alliances and stuff were such a mess. Like Germany lost the war, but and I'm sure you could say, well, there were some bad things Germany did, sure. But was Germany necessarily the bad guys any more than Britain and France in those wars that they were all entangled with Austria and Hungary and all these other things? I don't know that it's nearly as clear cut. I don't know that. But World War II, yes. World War I is much more complicated. But when you basically drop all of the weight of the war, the debt of the war, the pain of the war onto this one country, you can't drop it on Austria-Hungary. They dissolved. You can't drop it on Russia. They fell over. You can't drop it on the Ottoman Turks. They also collapsed. Like the only one left is Germany. So you make them pay for it, and then they collapse under that pressure as well. Germans grew up very embittered by all of the things happening. I don't know that that necessarily guarantees a rise of the Nazis, but didn't help. And most people would say what happened here does lead pretty directly to what
Yeah,
happens.
because that's what I know, like the Treaty of Versailles, that's like basically really messed up relations. Or, I mean, there was a war. So relations weren't great. But then that treaty really like hammered
Which
Germany.
Britain and France
Yeah.
lost tons of people. They lost tons of money. They're trying to fix things. I can see from their perspective why. I mean, the old way was always make the loser pay. I can see from their perspective why they're doing it. But Woodrow comes in saying, I know this doesn't work, and then compromises on what he knows because he wants this other thing. And so to me, I put more weight on him because I'm like, you knew better. The other guys are doing what they've always done, but supposedly you're smarter than this, and yet you compromise because you wanted this stupid League of Nations. And one more thing about the League of Nations, because you're like, well, hasn't he made enough enemies? He makes 2 more enemies that are important. The next enemy he makes is Japan. Japan was like, hey, we fought in World War I in Europe. We're strong. We helped out. Can we be treated as equals of the League of Nations? And Woodrow Wilson puts all his pressure on Britain to say, no, sorry, Japan. We're not going to write a clause that says all humans are equal in the League of Nations. Japan. Basically, Japan was like, we treat each other as equals. And Woodrow Wilson basically got the British people to say no. And Japan walked back, and basically that news I saw is on inciting events of Japan. Like that crushed the Japanese desire to become a part of the world. The extreme radicals in Japan use that as evidence to say we'll never be accepted. Let's build our own empire. Forget trying to be a part of Europe and America. Like we're always going to be seen as different than them. The only way they'll respect us is if we're powerful. So we see this direct inciting event to Japan becoming an empire. We see this direct inciting event to make Italians hate America. We see this direct inciting event to make Germany hurt. And another war that's actually attached to all this, in the middle of like his presidency, another person visited Woodrow Wilson. His name is Ho Chi Minh. And he came to President Woodrow Wilson saying, hey, can you help us out with France? We're in a big bind right here. We want France to cool off its colonizing power. Like, if we can't become free, we at least need France to like go easier on us. Woodrow Wilson completely like pushed it out, said, we don't have time for that. Deal with France on your own. You're an embarrassment. Like, we don't care what happens to you. 45 or so years later, America's in the Vietnam War with Ho Chi Minh and those people who's now the leader of the Communist Party. So, like, I'm not saying maybe Woodrow Wilson couldn't have stopped the Vietnam War. Maybe Woodrow Wilson couldn't have stopped the radical elements of Japan getting stronger, but he didn't help.
That's what I'm hearing here because I'm looking at these things like even like would Germany have been mad if Woodrow wasn't there? Yes, because the Treaty of Versailles was really hard on Germany, so they would have been mad. But like he comes on the scene as like the savior of the world, kind of like, hey, here's the League of Nations, let world peace for all, it's gonna be great. Like he comes on the scene for all these things, but he delivers on none of them. Like he doesn't really deliver on any of the promise.
The legislature did not deliver, but you can't help but wonder if a much smoother, maybe much more Christ-like operator was working who looked over at Japan and said, of course you're equals. You're made in the image of God. Get that rid of the League of Nations. Japan, welcome to the team. We're going to not just you, Japan, but even some of the other nations around you. And they probably be like, not Korea, right? But like, okay, like some of they would, we're going to let everybody on board. Japan had Korea as a colony at that time. So that's why I said that. But like, we're going to bring, if they had that attitude, what would that have done to Japan in the sight of the world? What would that have done to Japan as they were like, hey, we are being acknowledged as equals. Let's keep going down this road. For Germany, if they hadn't had all that debt, if Woodrow could have stopped Britain and France or at least fought for them, maybe some of that bitterness would have swept in. If Ho Chi Minh had been talked to, and during this time when France is weak, Woodrow Wilson went to France and said, hey, by the way, you're having a problem here. How can we make things better in Vietnam? Like a smoother operator, who knows how much he could have helped make the world a better place. But we didn't get the smooth operator. We got Woodrow Wilson with a hammer shoving this covenant down everyone's throat because he believed it was God's way of saving the earth.
I'm still thinking about it.
We're not done though.
Okay, let me just work this one through. So there's this, and a little bit of a side step. Like there's this Indiana Jones. Like in the movie of Indiana Jones, the plot would have evolved without him being there. Like the one with I think it's the Ark of the Covenant. The Nazis would have found it. They would have melted their face up. Like everything would have happened if he wasn't there. Like with this one, I feel like
with King Japan, I don't agree. Like, Britain and France were kind of cool with Japan. It was Woodrow who specifically put his thumb on the scale and said, keep Japan out. He didn't want to say it directly, but it's like very clear. He carried and said, Britain, do it for me. I won't. With Germany, you're right. Indiana Jones style, he wouldn't have stepped out. But imagine if Indiana Jones wasn't sitting there and not opening the box, but he was yelling, open the box, open the box. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like that's kind of what Woodrow's doing.
Like the box is over there.
We're Italy. He's not open. He hands them the box open. And then with Ho Chi Minh, the guy shows up and he goes, did you know there's a box over there? You should go find it. Like, you know what I mean? Like he's just a casual observer in some of these. He's finding problems to them. That's just how he handles the wrap up of World War II. Now, during this time, at some point, World War I, thank you. That's just how to scaled up World War II for us. So that's just wrapping up World War I. Now he goes back to the United States. He comes back with his Covenant of the League of Nations, the thing that will save humanity in war and allow Christ to eventually come back because he's going to set up a new world utopia. And Congress hates it. Congress says we will not pass it. Congress says we didn't send you over there to sign a treaty. George Washington said in the founding documents, like not the founding documents, but his founding address, he's like, hey, don't get involved in farewell address. Okay, anyway, so you just don't get involved in entangling alliances with Europe. And you came back from this war we didn't really want to go to. You promised we wouldn't go to. And you're bringing back a treaty we have to sign that makes us a part of some like worldwide government thing. What are you doing, Woodrow? And he's like, isn't it brilliant? It's great. You're going to love it. And they go, we will not pass this. And he goes, fine. He like stomps out of Congress. He goes, I'll go to the American people. They'll make you pass it because if you don't pass this brilliant idea, you will all get unelected. And so he begins a tour through America where he is speaking and eloquating and just explaining to the American people how this is the greatest thing ever. And while he's going, he has a stroke. Because remember, he's supposed to be living a stress-free life. This is not a stress-free time. He has another stroke or his first stroke, depending on which diagnosis was correct. He goes home and he will spend the next year pretty much incapacitated. Now, he will still be president, but he's not. And some scholars, the Woodrow Wilson Foundation will be like, he was great. He was great. He was just in bed sleeping a lot. Other people will point out that he probably was completely mentally incapacitated for this year. He will sign a lot of documents that will be brought to him. His wife will put them in his room and then will come back with them signed. So you do the math on who's running the show. Oh, is this the wife from before? No, she passed away. The first wife, the depressed wife, she died.
So wait, can I stop you
Yeah.
before you're gonna say? Please tell me that it's the other girl, like the.
It's not.
So there's a third.
There's another girl. After his wife passed away, a couple years later, he meets a really nice gal. He likes her. And on basically the eve of their engagement, I can't remember if the news breaks. It is actually, I believe that like basically a newspaper person gets a hold of all of these letters from this other woman and publishes them, either a sister or somebody. They end up getting out into the world. Or it is privately done. I can't remember which one it was, but this woman goes to him and he's like, "Hey, I have to tell you." And they hash it out all night long. And it actually is kind of a sad story because when I read it from her perspective, this other woman, the second wife that comes at, she thought the world of Woodrow. And then like afterwards, she's like, "Oh, he's just a man."
But she wasn't as supportive as.
I was not convinced the scholars and historians that there's nothing going on here and that this was just an accidental friendly lettering that went too far. She seemed to believe it was something important, and she kind of comes out of this meeting and basically was like, you read her before, I'm marrying the most amazing man. He's president of the United States, but even more than that, he's a great guy. After that night, it's like, I'm going to marry him because he's so important to the world, and my duty will be to help him because of the impact he has in the world, which is a different kind of marriage.
That is true, but then coming back to where we just were, the stroke.
She's now the wife in charge. Oh, and this new wife is very clear. You're no longer writing letters to her.
Okay,
So your pen pal that you just happen to be super close friends with are not your pen pal anymore. So that's done. We're not doing that anymore. And again, I don't remember if maybe somebody died or whatever. It's been a while since I looked at that part of the story. I'm not unclear on the details of the letters being very extravagant and detailed. I am just unclear on the dates there for a second. The new wife cuts that out. But now, this new wife who's married him, taking things into a room, Woodrow is supposedly signing them, and they are coming back signed. Democrat House leader is like kind of like the Democrat people in charge are like, Woodrow's great, never been healthier. That guy tells great jokes, love him so much. The Republicans are going, is he like actually running the show? Audiences may be thinking of something in contemporary events right now, but I assure you that this has never happened before since. And so the wife here seems to be signing a lot of documents and things as this is going on.
try to stay away from any controversies.
Yeah, a lot of recent, it's every 100 years or so. Anyway, so
How old was Woodrow though? Like,
Woodrow, I don't believe he was definitely not like in his. I don't think he was in his 70s. He was younger than that because actually, if you're older, you may remember that American presidents used to be younger. Like Barack Obama was not super old when he was president. He was like late 40s, early 50s, I believe. George W. Bush, I believe, was in his 50s, maybe early 60s when he got out. Now, I can't wait to be 100 so I can start running for president. Like that's the way it goes these days. But there was a time when we tend to run youngerish people. Woodrow would have been not as young as all that, but I don't think he was not like in his 80s, like they currently are. Okay, so anyway, back to these guys. They're signing papers, and this goes on for about a year. And then they try to announce that he's going to run for a third term. And that's when the political parties kind of come together and have a heart to heart and basically go, you can't run Woodrow for a third term. And she's just like, why not? They're like, because he's in his room all day. No one's seen him. He's like, oh, there's watch back there. No. And she would like bring him out and he would give like little speeches where he wouldn't answer questions to prove that he was still healthy. But
yeah, I mean, just the audacity to do it again, to be like, let's go for it, third term.
yeah, that was bold to say like, we're going to try one more term in this guy. They're very clearly told like there's no third term. And by the way, like this is not the only time this has happened. There was also FDR who's in a wheelchair but runs for president while pretending to be totally healthy, gets elected as like, by the way, I'm in a wheelchair. Like, I mean, like health in America and American presidents are not always very forthcoming. I guess I'll put that.
Yeah.
And whatever, again, other examples you could think of are on your own. So we have Woodrow's, he They send it to somebody else, and Woodrow's basically like, he's still cognizant enough to say, whoever takes my place needs to really push for, I'm sure you can guess what, the covenant of the League of Nations. The guy goes, okay, we're running on the covenant of the League of Nations. He gets absolutely slaughtered. Like it's like 60-40 crushed. He's not going to win. And there dies the covenant of the League of Nations. So America never joins, which is ironic because about 40 plus countries do join the covenant, but everyone kind of agreed even before Woodrow went back, like if America doesn't join, this isn't going anywhere. And it doesn't go anywhere because America doesn't join the very covenant of the League of Nations. Even I think Woodrow dies around 1924, and even his last like official speech is short. He's recovered a bit from the stroke, so he can kind of talk, but his like final dying words are basically like his final speech to the public is like, once the covenant of the League of Nations is signed, everything's gonna be great. You're gonna love it. And everyone's just kind of like, okay, old man, you didn't get there. Like, we're not doing that. This is not gonna happen. And he dies with the dream of this covenant of the League of Nations that will make everything better, and then Jesus will come. And if this is his whole thing, is like it's all been for this. The war was fought. We're gonna fix it all, and it's because of the covenant of the League of Nations. If you know much about history, covenant of the League of Nations doesn't do very well. They don't have an army or any real power. Japan invades Manchuria, and the covenant of the League of Nations says, "Hey, that's bad." And Japan says, "Okay, I'm out of the League of Nations." And the League of Nations goes, and then Germany is so close. Germany kind of does the same thing. Germany leaves, and then Italy invades Ethiopia, and same thing. It doesn't do anything. It never has any power or any clay, but it does become the model of the United Nations, which you could also argue is yet another flaw in the Woodrow Wilson legacy here.
I mean, let's just put it this way. I don't think it has been as effective as people have wanted it to be.
I think that's a really gentle way to put the United Nations. And so that's Woodrow Wilson's story. Let's fast forward to, is he Christian or not?
So my first question then would be, do we know anything more? Because he starts out very Christian. Like he starts out really with strong religious views in anything that he says and in his publications. Like how much of that is there, for example, in the League of Nations, like in the Covenant? Like
So he used, I believe, if I remember the phrase, like covenant is used 6 different times, like through the founding documents of the covenant of the League of Nations. He's firmly in the belief that this is like an Old Testament style covenant of the nations before God.
yeah, yeah. So that as well, and then actually, like we already talked about, the eugenics part also being part of his post-mill vision of like, we're reaching higher levels of
Yeah.
basically like where it's only getting better. Like taking those things into account, it does feel genuine on his part. Like I do feel like he was convinced of what he was doing. I don't feel there's like an evil scheme.
So that I would agree with you. Said I don't look at Woodrow, because Woodrow Wilson will continue even when he's in the peace conferences in Europe. He will like try to go to church when he has a chance. It's like he's known for continuing his attendance in church and continuing home Bible studies. Like everything on him, like if you're writing down his stats, he looks like he should be a Christian. I don't think this was some, twist the mustache villainous scheme to look Christian to trick everybody. I think Woodrow Wilson definitely believed in the ideals that he's pushing forward, because, like the Covenant of the League of Nations, he pushed that forward against his own party, against his own hurt, to the point that it stressed him out so bad he had a stroke. Like he was going against everything to do it. So he definitely thought he was doing something good. It just wasn't, I would argue, good at all.
That is true, but yeah, we already talked about it before. But how much can you really put that on him? Like there were some bad calls.
Well, the segregation stuff.
Okay, that one inexcusable. Like let me just as we were talking about, just
Writing on his wife's, or sorry, writing intricate letters to his to this good friend he keeps running into.
okay,
Coincidentally,
good point. There is some very inexcusable stuff. Like I even as we were talking, I looked up like just on his Wikipedia. There's like this quote here that is actually in the Birth of a Nation, where he says, a quote by Woodrow Wilson: "The white men were roused by a mere instinct of self-preservation until at last there had sprung into existence a great Ku Klux Klan, a veritable empire of the South to protect the Southern country." Like, I feel like anyone endorsing the Ku Klux Klan or endorsing this kinds of like levels of racism, like absolutely unheard of and not okay. is there, and this is just me asking, this is not me trying to make a point. Is there any case to be made for time and context?
So let me just jump back a second. Because since we're pulling out our computers real quick to do some research, I had said earlier that he sent soldiers to different countries. I then got a quick list for us here. Nicaragua was another one. Dominican Republic, Cuba. Apparently, he also sent soldiers to Russia, but they were not a part of the World War I Russian effort. This was actually called Polar Bear Expedition to kind of help stop the communists. Actually, that is one. Woodrow Wilson is an extreme progressive. In fact, if you look, you'll see like in the United States, there are still statues and buildings and things named after Woodrow Wilson. Like, you would think of all the people whose statues you would tear down, the dude who segregated the government and like create like on the federal level should be the first guy. Why doesn't he get torn down? It's because he's the father of modern day progressivism. Like, he is the founding Democrat progressive dream. If you tear him down, you kind of tear down everything that he stood for. And that's so much of still what that, kind of vision of progressive America is today. So, but he didn't like communism. And so, like, when the communists kind of the one big benefit that he did was like when the communists kind of reached out to him for help, he was very clear. I'm a progressive. I'm not a communist. Go deal with your own problems. I don't work with you guys. And he also did kind of the same thing in China. It looks like he also sent soldiers to Panama and then also to Liberia. So,
Liberia.
not
Ooh, that
and this doesn't include, again, the soldiers he sent to fight in World War I. So this is not exactly a non-interventionist person, and this is also not exactly a peacemaking pacifist president. Like, he's sending soldiers all around the world constantly during this time. In fact, I don't know, but I would be willing to bet that's a lot more soldiers than average. So back to what you were saying. Is there some argument for context of his time? Was that what you were saying with it?
yeah, that was the question I had, because we've been doing this like for Charlemagne for
Here's why I think I would say no. Compare him to William McKinley. Lived about 15 years, but a few years before him, not 15. He was president about 13 years before him. After the Spanish War, he has the country of the Philippines in his hands, and he brings. People said this was for show. I still think it was. He brings a bunch of Baptists and other like Christians together. He goes, "What do I do with the Philippines?" He's like, "We won this colony. We didn't really mean to win this colony. We sent like 2 boats there, and the Spanish Navy like completely fell apart in front of us. Like, this was such an accident. I don't know how we got this, but now we have it. So what do we do with it?" He's like, "I don't want us to become a colonizer that takes over countries and rules them." And to Woodrow Wilson's credit, he kind of said the same thing. But he also said, "But also, will there ever be a greater chance for like real Christianity to enter the Philippines? Like, if we let the Philippines go and become independent and don't use this opportunity to send missionaries to the Philippines, like, is that on us for not taking this window when we had it wide open? What do we do?" And so he met with pastors and people to pray and care about what do we do with these souls that are in trouble. William McKinley's living during the same era, only a little bit before him, to technically closer to the Civil War than Woodrow Wilson. But look at how he handles people that are a different skin color and that are lower than, lower cat, whatever you say.
Wilson was known about this. Like, they would have known.
This is a well-known thing. And then when William McKinley gets, like, the Secret Service is like graphic. I can't remember if our staff, but the Secret Service like tackle the guy who does it. And William McKinley famously says, "Hey, don't go easy on him. Like, don't be rough on him. He needs Jesus too." And then he dies singing a hymn to the Lord. Now compare that 12 years later to how Woodrow Wilson lives his life. Like, this is a guy who's also a Christian, also dealing with these issues of race. You look at the swing of time. Like, yes, Woodrow is a product of the intellectual eugenics movement, but there were a lot of Christians saying this is bad. And he's a part of the intellectual movement who blows them off. When that guy was taken to a zoo that I mentioned earlier, there were Baptists outside the zoo, like, every day. And not just Baptists, I'm sure there were Presbyterians, but they were outside protesting, saying, "Let this guy go. We will pay for his house. We will take him back to Africa, but he's a human." And it was the intellectual snobs looking down their nose going, "You're so stupid. You think he's a human." And then eventually they did have to let him go, and they took him, they fed him, they brought him back home. Like, it was a mess. This guy's life was ruined basically by this. And so there's Christians living like that, calling out this horrible mess that is eugenics. And then there's Christians like Woodrow Wilson who seem to be looking down on those guys. I don't think he gets credit for being a product of his time. In fact, he gets credit for being a multiplier of that product. The government was segregated after him. The situation for a black person in America got significantly worse under Woodrow Wilson. where the local guy might not have hired you because he didn't maybe trust you or something like that. He might have been a racist jerk. The government, up until that point, the federal government was hiring black people equally with white people until Woodrow Wilson, where he created the first barriers to basically say, you can only get this high. He made everyone's situation worse. And even people in his own day said things like, I don't think he likes anybody other than like that. Like, even for his day, racist, oh, he's really racist.
Yeah. Yeah. So that brings me to the question, because I don't have to ask. Like, I think you're a pretty firm no on this one. I'm then just struggling with this idea. Like, how does that, like, uh, almost kind of sad.
Yeah.
Like a guy is so involved and so she good in pushing his ideals. Like, and some of them obviously bad. Like the racism, that one's without question. But the League of Nations, the Covenant of the League of Nations, in essence, it has some.
You could say it is like world. That sounding like a very Christian thing to push.
Yeah.
I get like I don't think the Covenant of League of Nations was necessarily a good idea. I don't think it would work because I don't think the United Nations has worked very well. I don't think giving every like nation and saying it just doesn't seem to work to bring all the countries together necessarily. Maybe someday it could, but they don't like all the same countries don't speak the same language. I don't mean English. I mean like they don't all speak. If one country wants one thing and one country wants another, and they're just completely on different sides of culture, bringing them together in the same room has not necessarily brought them together in a vision for the world. You need to give them, I don't want to say I know how to do this, but like you need to give them something to attain to more than just let's talk to each other because talking, they can send diplomats to, all through history, diplomats have been talking to each other. They need something that they're aspiring towards. And the Covenant of League of Nations wasn't it. But you could see how, as a Christian in theory, that could be a good idea, though. As you could see how any Christian could think that that would work. I think for me, yes, I am a no on Woodrow. And it's really hard though. Like I know that I'm listing all these horrible things he did because I really do think he was an awful, awful president that deserves to be remembered for a lot of really bad, damaging things. That a lot of the most racist things that America is famous for, yeah, slave owning in the 1850s and 60s. Obviously, that wasn't related to him. But a lot of the moments that people are thinking of when they think of the really bad stuff that happened, it really did stem from his presidency. Like his bad ideas flowed for the next 60 years and hurt people for decades, not even including World War II and the Vietnam War stuff as well. But on a personal level, I really did struggle with him because I'm like, the guy reads his Bible, prays,
I know.
preaches. That seemed like why? And
That's what I struggle with as well. Yeah.
and what I think I've come to the conclusion of is if he is saved, boy, is by the skin of his teeth and the grace of the Lord, because there's not fruit to show it. But if the reason I think he's not is because the parable of starting well or something. He like the seed went in. Maybe it looked like it was producing fruit, but somewhere along the way, politics and his own personal power began to take the idea that I am exempted from the things that apply to other people. I have a vision, and it became, yeah, he wanted a covenant of League of Nations, but he wanted it because he had a vision for the world that was more important than was actually happening on the ground. He had a vision for how to make Jesus come back and how to make the world a better place for God that wasn't related to what God actually wanted. That's why he could look down on people of a different race. That's how he could ignore the atrocities of some of these treaties. But it didn't matter because he was getting his way. Like his vision of what to do was more important than God's vision. In some ways, it's almost a little bit Saul of the Bible-esque, where he should have all the evidence that God is real, but he's just going forward with his own way of doing things, regardless of what God is trying to do. And so, in a lot of ways, he's like the greatest cautionary tale you can tell. Boy, he knew the truth. Boy, he looked good on paper, but he was so wrapped up in his own way of doing it. He's so wrapped up in his intellectual, prideful way of going forward that it ended up all completely falling apart.
I think you're really or gave an answer to a question I hadn't even asked yet, because I was like the same thing. Like, but he goes to church, he reads his Bible, he preaches those sermons. Like he's in all ways, at least outwardly, like there's all these signs of a Christian, of a disciple. But then, like, how could it go so wrong? Like, and really, like that ambition, that selfish, like going your own path. I think that's really clear where you see him sort of go off the rail a little bit.
Well, and there's little bit hints of it throughout too, like his I'm gonna run for politics and I'm a president kind of person. Like that's not a humble thing to say, right? Like his little, I'm gonna have my own little affair off to the side here. Maybe it's physical, maybe it's not. But what you would clearly condemn to someone else, it's okay for him. Like he's making these little exemptions and he's doing these little things that show, dude, there's a lot of pride there, but he's masking it as he goes. And I don't think he's putting a mask on like I'm gonna trick everybody. I just think somehow he disconnected his faith from his life.
And that is a sad lesson to learn, but a very important lesson to learn about humbleness and pride. And I think, I mean, the Bible's clear about pride, that it's
Yeah.
not a good thing. And yeah, I mean, I'm gonna have to give you an answer. Right? I'm gonna have to say something. Like, if I'm completely honest, I'm not gonna go no with you. I'm also not gonna say yes. I'm gonna go with an I don't know on this one, because I still do struggle with the part, like how much can you really put on him? And he makes mistakes, and we all make mistakes. Um, his mistakes were maybe a little bit more like influential, but that's also because of the position he has. Like
Yeah.
there's so much here to discuss, but like how much can you put it on him that he is in such an influential position? Okay, those who um have more, or how do you say it, those that have more responsibility have more to, answer for. So there's that. So I'm just processing this one out loud. So sorry for the people listening wanting that final answer. Um, I like you said as well. Like if you do, meet him in heaven, you would probably have some questions if you want to spend some time on that. You would be like, oh, well,
Grace is a lot, isn't it? You're like, Jesus really could forgive anybody.
something like that. But I I'm I'm gonna lean maybe slash no, because of, but for me it's more even like the character parts, like the pride and the affair. Like I'm not with those signs of like this is an affair. Like if my wife would be doing it, or if I would be doing it and people would call me out and it would say an affair, this is an affair, I would like, yeah, you're right. Like I need to fix this.
Is at that point,
So,
if it wasn't a physical affair, I can only imagine it wasn't a physical affair because of his pride. Like, oh, I would never have a physical affair. I'll do everything, but you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, okay,
yeah.
if you might as well have had the physical affair because you did every single piece of the affair part minus that one physical aspect. It's basically the
I
same.
mean, let's go to the Sermon on the Mount by Jesus. Like
Yeah.
anyone who has looked at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery. So I think that one's, I mean, I'm not as confused as the scientist on this one. And when you spend a month on an island in the Caribbean together, you're not just, bidding. It's not social distancing, that. So
I mean, a really godly Christian man who's been president of like a Christian university, who spent time speaking in chapel, would do everything in his power. What does it say? To keep away from the appearance of evil. Woodrow Wilson did everything in his power to have the appearance of evil. And so I just don't know what else you can say.
yeah, okay, okay. So final verdict time, Troy. Just for the record,
I'm gonna say no. I'm sorry. I do think he started out with some clearly there was Christian ideas. I just don't know if the root was not strong, if he's like the seed that got carried away by the temptations, worries, or whatever. But I look at Woodrow Wilson, I see a man who's driven by pride, not a man who's driven by love for his neighbor or love of Christ. He does look like a Christian on the outside, but I'm seeing just a very strong pride. And again, if I didn't have the affair, I might just go, he's really confused. But the affair part of it really does add another layer where I'm like, you can't get every policy wrong and also cheat on your wife and get to claim that you're this great Christian.
and he wasn't the one to stop it. It was his second wife. He said like, "Hey, you gotta stop."
That's true because he's
So that also showed.
some repent and like, I'm gonna come clean moment thing. Granted, his first wife did seem to know about it and was encouraging it, so that is kind of a weird one there. But still, as a man of God, you should put a stop to it. It doesn't seem like the Lord convicted him of it. It seems like he got found out.
Yeah. Okay. So for me, I'm gonna say, let me put it like this. Like if we put it on like a 0 to 100 scale, where 0 is no and 100 is yes, I'm gonna be on like a 15. Like not a definitive no, but like definitely leaning towards no. But
Negative 10 over here.
negative. But I have some bits and pieces where I'm like,
I do.
I let me put it like this. Maybe I'm too hopeful a person, but there's some bits and pieces here where I'm like, I would hope that maybe in his last moments, undocumented moments, I know this is a cop out. This is like, but I would hope that he knew his Bible well enough.
I would say that I
And
understand your pity for him.
that
He
that
is
made me the
a
thing.
pitiful if I again, I maybe the Lord worked and did be maybe the strokes eventually cleared his eyes a bit. If he is a Christian in heaven, great, the Lord Jesus can forgive anybody, and I know that only by the forgiveness of our sins and grace can he be there. So, wonderful. If he's not, he is pitiful. He reminds me, I did say Saul earlier. He really kind of reminds me of Saul. If you look at Saul's early life, there's a moment or two where Saul genuinely looks like a decent guy. Like he helps fight off the Philistines. Like he does some things for the Lord. And so that makes his fall so much more tragic. Another guy is kind of Joab, where Joab is a super confusing character in the story of David. And you might be saying, oh, Joab's super straightforward. He murders people. Well, David also murders people. So murder people gets you out. David's in trouble. But Joab does have these moments where it looks like he's a Christian. Like he's like, I'm going to fight for your side and the Lord will see who wins. And then he has the other moments where he's like, oh my gosh, Joab, like put the knife away. Like, what is wrong with you? And like, that's kind of how I feel like Woodrow. But in the end, most people think if Joab is saved, boy, it's by the skin of his teeth. He's probably not, and that's kind of where I'm actually more mercy to Joab maybe than Woodrow, but that's because I've been affected more by Woodrow than I am affected by Joab. So there's probably that. Not like I'm affected, like I wake up every day. My dollars don't have enough, dang Woodrow. But I mean, like when I get my taxes, I feel it. But realistically, I'm not that affected by Woodrow, but history-wise, like recent American history, we've been affected a lot more by the actions of that. So I do see cases in the Bible. Look at all the first and second kings who start well and then fumble on that shell, as it were.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what Woodrow looks like to me. It looks like one of those guys who he had a good moment and then he trips and hits his head and does a bunch of messed up things on the way out.
Yeah. Okay. So there you have it. Maybe you're a little bit more of a hopeful person like me, or you're just like a realist like Troy over here. But let us know in the comments what you think, anything we missed. And if you've been following Revived Thoughts for a while, you may have heard Troy talk about Woodrow in the past as well. So maybe you've already given your comments in the past, but just do it again because we would love to discuss them as well. Like we said before, this episode and on the podcast as well. We also really just want to learn. We think this is a podcast that is really about a discipleship. Like, okay, what does it look like? What should it look like? What can we learn from these people? On this one, definitely something about pride. So if there's stuff we missed, just give us a comment and we'll talk about it. We'll do comment episodes and we'll hopefully learn some more. Maybe you'll get me to that 0, or maybe you get Troy above the negative. Who knows?
So, Mark, I will say this. I think Woodrow Wilson almost makes a candidate for Antichrist or not. Like, was he meant to be an Antichrist figure through history or not? Because he is the range.
That is another episode idea that we have, another podcast.
We hope you enjoyed listening. Leave your comments. Tell us what you think. Were we right? Were we wrong? What did we miss? There's some big piece of very obvious Christianity, his final sermon that he gave where he repents of some stuff. Let us know if we missed out on those kind of things. We'd love to hear from you. This is Troy.
And my name is Mark, and this was Christian or Not.